All right. Welcome to episode 116 of Convos on the Pedicab, our first episode of the new year. I'm here with my friend Jackson, better known as Macro Jack on Twitter. I'm super excited to have you. Before we get started, just big shout out to Texas Late Girl on Patreon. She's a premium subscriber, so you need to get a little shout out on the podcast if you subscribe to the Patreon. So just a little incentive to do so. But anyway, super excited to have you. You're honestly one of my favorite accounts on Twitter. I feel like I learn a lot more from you than a lot of other people probably would have learned in their college finance classes.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alex. It's good to be here, and I appreciate the kind words. That's nice to hear.
So how long have you been a Bitcoiner for? What made you get into this?
Yeah, so I think like most people, at least in my experiences, I got into Bitcoin because I wanted to make money.
Okay.
So initially, I bought Bitcoin in 2017. I want to say it was in August or September of 2017. Before it really pumped, it was about maybe $4,000 a coin. I put in, at the time I was actually still in school, so I didn't have a lot of money to begin with. I think I put in $100 or $200 into Bitcoin, and I watched that kind of go up to maybe $800 and then come crashing down. And I didn't really know what I owned. It was kind of like a buddy of mine in school was like, "Hey, you should buy this. It's going to pump." And I did, and like I said, I made 4x on my small investment, but I never sold it. And then I just kind of wrote it down into the bear market and started to learn a little bit more 2018, 2019, and then really 2020 with the onset of COVID and just kind of I was living in New York at the time, and I moved back actually with my parents in 2020. So I was outside of the city.
So you're from New York?
I'm from Pennsylvania, actually, the Philadelphia area.
Right.
Yeah. But I was living in New York after I graduated from school. And 2020 was when things really started to click for me in a lot of ways in Bitcoin and also in other areas of my life.
That makes sense. What do you do for work?
So I still work in finance and traditional finance.
You work in traditional finance? Okay.
Yeah.
So as somebody who works in traditional finance, when did you realize that there was something inherently wrong with our financial system?
So I was a little too young in the 2008 financial crisis to really understand what was going on. But as that kind of passed and I took some courses in college, and after I graduated from college, and I started to learn a little bit more independently, things started to maybe not sit so well with me. And it was really in 2020, particularly, I would say, is when things clicked for me. And what I say things, what in particular made a lot of sense or kind of disenfranchised me with the system was what they were referring to as the K-shaped recovery. If you can remember that, being tossed around by academia and Wall Street and economists, and I'll explain that. So essentially what happened was there was a ton of fiscal and monetary stimulus that really pumped up asset prices and made Wall Street a ton of money in 2020. Meanwhile, the government was, shutting down small businesses. And maybe here in Texas it wasn't as bad, but in where I was in Pennsylvania it was pretty bad. And it was just like this dichotomy of if you're in the financial services industry or just kind of like, I guess, adjacent to that, you were doing very well that year. But if you were kind of outside of that, you were probably getting crushed. Not only because your business was getting closed, but then next year, because of all the money printing, your cost of living was maybe 50% or 100% higher than it was the year before.
Yeah, and a lot of the progressive activists who you thought were on the side of working people and like small business owners and people that complained the loudest against big corporate overreach literally became the biggest mouthpieces for the big mega corporations that pushed these lockdowns. So it was a really eye-opening experience, COVID.
Right, it really was. That was for me when I started to really understand the incentives of the financial system. And ever since then, nothing's been the same, I would say, since 2020 for me.
Well, I got lucky living in Texas. It made me very it didn't affect us as much as it would have had I lived where you were at. Mm-hmm. But it's also made me appreciate living in a place like Texas with the rules being the way they are. And it's also made me very well, I said appreciative, but very aware of how delicate the systems that we have are. And it's made me very determined to make it so that we preserve these systems in Texas as much as possible, because I saw what happened in other parts of the country. And I couldn't imagine if I owned a restaurant in California, and I had to live through like a Gavin Newsom governorship, I don't know what that would do to me. Like that would have like that's the type of stuff brings people to like drug addiction and suicide and all types of horrible things, as a result of these lockdowns that really didn't need to occur and were just politicized for like a multitude of reasons.
Right, and then after the lockdowns too, because of all of the money printing that took place in the U.S. specifically, it was over $6 trillion of new money supply entered between 2020 and 2021 into the economy and financial markets. So you can imagine if the government crushes your business with their mandates, and then you go to the store and all of a sudden eggs are $7 a dozen, right? And milk is $6 a gallon, and ground beef is $8-10 per pound. Like everything is real food is so expensive now.
And it used to be like that, but that was like the top of the line meat was like that, and now that's just
right.
Now that's like regular mystery meat is that price.
Mystery meat is that price. You're right.
Yeah, we're lucky though. We're at like there's farmer markets, and if you buy from farmer markets, if you buy wholesale, the price difference isn't that bad.
Yeah, so that's actually I'm a big proponent of that. Buying locally, shaking a rancher's hand. Maybe you've seen that movement on Bitcoin Twitter, right?
I
With
have,
Texas
yeah.
Slim.
Well, I had a guy from KNC Cattle, Cole Bolton, on. That was really cool. And I bought I think like $80 worth of ground beef from him finally. And I bought some beef tallow from him, and I figured out how to render it. And I've been cooking with that stuff, and it's like it makes a world of difference cooking with.
What are you making in your tallow? What are you frying in your tallow?
Everything. I mean, I'm just like, I made the tallow, and like whenever I make eggs, I just cook the eggs with the tallow. Whenever I'm making rice and chicken, just put that in the tallow, and that's,
yeah, that's awesome.
I mean, not in the oven, right? Because like I don't think you can put tallow in the oven. But like once I like recook the chicken and the meat, I just use the tallow.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm a big proponent of that. Localization over globalization, right? So becoming more resilient by not being reliant on your grocery store for your food, and actually going out and either going to a farmer's market and getting to know the local farmers and ranchers in your area, or even going directly to the farm. That's a great way to do it as well. And it's such an easy step to not only make sure you're nourishing your body with great food, but also to have that extra layer of resiliency, so you're not relying on these global supply chains, functioning perfectly as we kind of grew accustomed to before COVID.
Yes, and it's also very easy for these things to be disrupted, as we're seeing. And the more these types of things get disrupted, the more the elites at the top of the food chain, so to speak, get to dictate how they want to fix the problem that they created.
Yeah, it's always funny. It's always funny how that works, right? It's here's a problem, but we actually have the solution for it. Just funny enough.
And it's also really funny that the solution gives us a lot more control over your lives than the previous model had. But
exactly.
If you think we did that on purpose, that's just a conspiracy theory. Come on, man. Yeah.
Yeah. So who's to say what a conspiracy theory is anymore, right? It seems like a lot of theories that people were peddling around in the past couple of years kind of seem to come true. And we were talking a little bit before we started recording just about there's this Davos class, and maybe, and not even maybe, certainly not everyone who's involved with that is a nefarious actor. But there are people who have malicious intent, and then I think other people who are just kind of academics or economists or, just like intellectuals, right? They kind of get wrapped up and become associated with this class and these solutions they're offering.
Well, the thing about being an intellectual is that you live your life in a bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, especially if you make it to PhD and you get a professorship at a university, that means that, like, in most cases, you're really good at following rules. And that you were a product of a system that just worked really well for you. Because if you make it all the way through elementary school to high school to college, into grad school, and then you get a PhD, chances are, like, you had to have gotten really good grades and excelled within that system. So the people that are like the academics in our university system, generally speaking, are people who have a predisposition at excelling in the system that is already at play. So as a result of that, they're less likely to question things because they have a great life. If you're a university professor, and all you have to do is just, you write a few papers, you do your research, you submit it into a journal, you teach your class, praise gets lavished upon you, you get called like a great thinker and a great mind. You're making a 6-figure salary, and you get to live in a really nice, comfortable college town where you're kind of like insulated from a lot of the problems that are going on throughout the rest of the world, it's really easy to just fall into that comfortable bubble.
Yeah, you're totally right. So I agree. I mean, there's a lot of people on Twitter who kind of make it seem that everyone who is in this, let's call it Davos man superclass, right? That maybe there's like 6,000 to 10,000 people in this class. It's like the 0.001%. A lot of people will make it out to seem that they're all very nefarious actors who are just like, want us all to be serfs in their system. But that's not necessarily the case. Maybe out of those, let's call it 6,000 to 10,000 people, maybe there's dozens or a couple hundred of people who are kind of maybe steering the bigger picture, but everyone else is just, like you said, they have a good life in a system that works for them. So why would they question it?
Why would they question it? Exactly. And I mean, the average college professor at a major university is not going to benefit from what we're screaming at from the heavens. Like they're not benefiting from digital serfdom.
Right.
They're not benefiting from owning nothing and being happy. Like none of them are benefiting from that at all. So it is, but they are benefiting from unknowingly pushing us closer and closer towards that future based on how they teach their classes, based on how they communicate on social media, based on the type of studies that they're allowed to do. Because like, I'm not an expert on things, right? But I do know that large mega corporations fund university studies heavily. Like in the 1950s, the sugar industry paid off scientists at like MIT and Harvard to do studies to say that eating sugar was good for you and that eating fats were bad for you. And now everybody has diabetes. And then now the pharma executives that prescribe medication for people with diabetes as a result of eating all this sugar, now they're getting a ton of money. And if you don't think that like pharma executives and big ag executives are going to the same country clubs together, like I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, so it ultimately comes down to, who is kind of behind the scenes funding all of this, right? And it comes back to the central banks, and that kind of perpetrates this too big to fail mentality where the people who rise to the top are the largest corporations that have the cheapest funding for credit, so they have the lowest interest rates on loans. And then, banks are able to make money on money that's created from nothing. And this system kind of gets perpetrated. And the same thing goes, in my opinion, with academia as well, where a lot of these schools, we have a lot of these schools in the kind of the academic journal setting are being funded by the government or corporations as well that have, like very close ties to the government with all their lobbying. So it kind of becomes almost like the cesspool of just like groupthink and pushing whatever propaganda would give them more power and money. That's what it ultimately comes down to, are those two.
What is your theory on why tuition costs are going up so high?
Well, it's subsidized, so the government makes it very easy to take out a student loan, and it's not only that as well, where it's there's available funding, and it's easy to go into debt to take those loans on and go to school. But it's also this idea, at least where I grew up, where it was like you need to go to college, right? At least in my circle where I grew up in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area, I know a couple of people who didn't go to college, and I think they're doing just fine. They're doing well. But that was a thing that everyone seemed they needed to do, right? So it was like, at all costs, go to college, study whatever you want. And I think it was just a combination of this demand that was artificially created, sold by a false story that to be successful, you needed to go to college, and also the government getting involved and making it very easy to borrow. And
then, when you pay the debt back, you don't pay it back. The government pays the debt back to the universities. It's not you. So the university can just say, hey, we're going to raise our price to infinity now. Like if you look at the cost of tuition at major universities, specifically private universities, it's like a meme stock. If you look at how the costs have gone up in the past like 20 or some odd years, you know what I mean? I don't remember when the government started doing federal student loans at this level, but I think it was reasons. I think it was like either under Obama or under Bush that they started doing this stuff. And tuition costs have like spiked even since then. So I think that creates a huge problem. And like I said earlier, if you're the borrower doesn't pay that to the university. The university is not the one lending the money. It is the government that is lending the money. So the university can just raise their prices to infinity without having anything to lose. And in turn, they get to just fund more departments that are totally useless. And then the more this happens, the more you just create a snowball effect of rising prices. And then if you point this out and talk about how we should maybe, I don't know, defund some of these universities or stop lending out money, the government should stop lending money for kids to go to college. The forgive student debt crowd and the, corporations are evil crowd and the we need to reduce income inequality crowd are going to be the loudest voices to shut you down.
Yeah, no, you said it just about as good as it gets. That was a great summary of that. Good points there. But yeah, it's a total mess, right? It's not only the education system. It seems that because of central banks and just their funding mechanism and the government, and so the central banks are supposed to be independent, but they're not. They're just essentially another bureaucratic agency affiliated with the U.S. government. The Federal Reserve is. So, yeah, I mean, it kind of affects everything. It's not even just the academic.
Well, and then you create a generation of like demoralized young men and women, and then when you have a nation of demoralized people within our age group, that's how you lose national sovereignty. Because like if you have a nation, like if we didn't have a nation of demoralized people within our age group, the 2020 George Soros riots would not have happened for 3 months straight.
Right. Yeah, so that's a great point, and it, in my opinion, comes back to,
for lack of a better word,
Yeah, and it comes back to, I think, fiat money, because people are demoralized. We were talking again before we recorded how expensive it is to live in an urban center like Austin, Texas. It's a great city, but it's quite expensive, and I think the issue that we've run into is post-1971, when the U.S. and the U.S. was really the last country on the gold standard, but after the gold standard was abandoned and money could be created for nothing, what we saw was largely most people not having their wages keep up with their cost of living, right? The pace of inflation. So I think that explains a lot of crises that we see in the world, like despair, opioid addiction. People just can't get ahead because things get more expensive and their wages do not keep up with that same rate of inflation.
Well, and also, mom can't take care of the kids anymore because now you need two incomes to sustain a household.
Yeah.
As a result of that, when money is backed by nothing, it gives governments and the corporations that are the closest to the money printer an excuse to get whatever they want whenever they want. And as a result, the government prints more money to subsidize these people. You're lending more money from these central banks, or you're borrowing money, from these central banks. And as a result, the governments have to raise taxes on everybody else in order to subsidize what they're doing to their friends. And in turn, your property values skyrocket. So if you own a home, you're making money, kind of, but your taxes are also going through the roof.
Right.
Your wages are not going to keep up with your taxes or anything else. Inflation starts to skyrocket as a result of higher costs for gas, higher costs for food, higher costs for every basic necessity. That doesn't go up as high as housing and other assets, but it still does go up and it contributes. And then in turn, if you own an apartment complex, if you're like a developer, if you want to rent if you have like a second property and you want to rent it out because of all of these other factors, and because, we live in a capitalist economy where people are going to want to make a profit from their investment because that's what you're supposed to do, everybody's rent starts going up. And then you just plunge people into a loop of unaffordability.
Yeah, and it's partially, and what you said is spot on. And I would just add as well that because fiat money is constantly devaluing due to the expansion of the money supply, the issue becomes that everything becomes monetized, right? So it's simply not enough to earn a livable wage and then hold that in U.S. dollars as your savings. You need to then go out and find investments that will preserve or grow your purchasing power. So that also contributes to the affordability crisis because, people need to if you have savings, you want to preserve it. You don't want to just give it to the government through inflation. So you're going out, you're buying homes if you can, you're buying equities, you're buying bonds, you're buying Bitcoin. You're buying whatever you can. Anything is more scarce than the U.S. dollar or other fiat currencies. So that also drives up demand for homes and makes them, less affordable for younger people, younger generations.
Yeah, this is all this is true.
Yeah.
All that is definitely true. And the other problem too is that unless you come from like an upper middle class or above, social class, you're probably not going to have the time to actually study and learn about how to make these investments. So then you're going to be affected by inflation worse than anybody else if you're poor.
Yeah.
Whereas if you if we had a sound money system or money backed by gold or people were just using Bitcoin, you can just save your money and have your net worth grow just by working hard and saving your money. And that's what this country should be about is, the harder you work, the smarter you are and the better your ideas are, you should be able to profit and grow as a result of those factors. And you still can, but unfortunately, the people that are closest to the money printer are going to profit a lot more, or have a greater likelihood of profiting more, regardless of whether or not they even have these attributes.
Yeah, so that's a fundamental issue because, like you said, it should be as simple as, producing value to society. So producing a good or service that other people desire, right? And earning a wage through that, and then being able to save, produce more than you consume, and then you have savings that you should just be able to hold on to, and that should preserve your purchasing power over time. But, that's not the case today. And like you said, unless you are, I would agree with you, upper middle class or above, and you have the means and resources to learn about these things, then you're disadvantaged even more. So then if you don't know how to invest, you either have to learn, which becomes a whole nother job in and of itself, or you then need to go out and find a financial advisor, which I would say is an important role in today's society, just because of how much inflation is out there. You need to be able to protect that wealth. But then they also run into an issue like, who can you trust? Because a lot of people are just trying to, sell you fees and commissions on financial products.
That's also true. So being somebody who works in finance, how did your colleagues and coworkers feel about your Bitcoin stance?
Yeah, they largely don't know about it.
Okay, I want to hear this.
Actually, I would say because I publish on Twitter pseudonymously.
Yeah.
So my friends, family, some coworkers, colleagues, they know who I am and they know my stance on Bitcoin and other things in the world. But I'm not publishing under my identity at the moment. But I would say I get some pushback even from people in my own life. They think I'm a little against the grain or a little crazy about Bitcoin and other things. But I'm just kind of processing facts as I see them and just trying to take a step back from all the insanity and not get wrapped up in things, and then determine on my own, what is the truth that I'm seeing, right?
I think that one thing that you have to also understand is that there's also a possibility that we could all be wrong.
Wrong about Bitcoin? Or
I think there's always a possibility that anybody could always be wrong about anything.
Yeah.
I think that the more you learn about the properties of Bitcoin and the principles and how Bitcoin is gonna produce this, 100 Bitcoin gets mined every 100 blocks get mined every 10 minutes, no matter what, and every 4 years the supply of new coins per block reward gets cut in half, and this happens consistently no matter what, and if you have your own, if you have your stuff in cold storage, your assets are safe from confiscation. Those factors, considering how the world is moving right now, seems like it's just a safe, it seems as though the rewards outweigh the risks. But there definitely are risks to investing in anything.
Yeah, I would agree. There are always risks to investing. And one thing I just want to touch on that you said is what I think is particularly important about Bitcoin is if you are buying Bitcoin and custodying your Bitcoin yourself. So with a cold storage device, or multi-sig. I think that we're just kind of on the precipice of financial censorship in the West. So, just kind of looking back, I think it was earlier this year, the Canadian truckers, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was this year.
Yeah.
Or 2022. It's all blending together, right? But
Yeah.
you get my drift. So I think that's just kind of maybe the beginning of trends that we'll start to see as we've seen an increase of censorship of speech, where we'll start to see people become more financially censored as well. And that's not only is Bitcoin important because you're able to store your savings in a hard asset, but you're also able to store your savings outside of the reach of any financial institution, which, if you're maybe talking about things that are unconventional or not party approved, you might want to have some of your wealth in your own custody.
No, I fully agree with you. And I think that when you understand those factors, the way in which the price moves doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because you can't put a price on your own personal sovereignty.
Yeah.
So what do you think the risks to Bitcoin are?
So,
because there are risks. When people say that there are no risks, that's like that turns into like, a bad faith argument, or being what people refer to us as Ponzi schemers and grifters and stuff like that. So like, if people are gonna like say that there's no risks, there are still risks, and people should understand what those risks are.
Yeah. So I would say at a personal level, I'm almost of the opinion that there aren't many risks. If you're let me preface it by saying, if you're putting not all of your net worth into it, right? Like with any investment, you should be prudent in how you approach it and not just kind of go all in. Or if you do want to do that, you can, but you just should understand that there are risks to doing that. But
and don't do anything on leverage.
Yeah, don't do anything on leverage. It's just not worth it. Even if you think like you're great at looking at charts on your computer and you think you can like trade and make a ton of money, right? Like just don't do it. You don't need to do it, because the thing is, I'll get to your question, I guess, in a moment. But the thing is with Bitcoin, just the fact that all these currencies are debt-based, the fiat currencies are debt-based, and the only way to kind of get out of the $31 trillion of debt that the U.S. government has racked up is either by just letting the entire financial system collapse, or continue to expand the money supply at an increasing rate. The thesis is quite simple with Bitcoin, and for that matter, really any financial or real asset, because every fiat currency on a long enough time scale will go to zero, and that's just the history of it. And I would say with risks with Bitcoin are more so centered around, I would say risks in how you use it, right? Like don't mess with the leverage. Don't go to any platform. Luckily, a lot of them have blown up, but don't go to platforms that tell you you're going to get yield on your Bitcoin. Don't keep your all of your Bitcoin on something like Coinbase. You should be learning how to self-custody. So a lot of the risks kind of come down to maybe not handling the asset properly and not learning enough before getting into it.
There's one risk. I actually agree with you fully, but there's one risk that you haven't mentioned. And it is quantum computing or a cyber attack potentially happening.
Yeah, so quantum, that is. I need to do more research on quantum, but what I'll say there is I know that has been a criticism of Bitcoin in the past, and I believe there's been some really interesting stuff written that I just haven't gotten around to reading yet. What I would say about that, though, as it pertains to Bitcoin, is if quantum computing materializes and becomes a threat, that would not be a threat to Bitcoin security. It would not only be a threat to Bitcoin security, but it would be a threat to, kind of the security of everything, right? Because quantum could then kind of break into any encryption, or I think there would be a lot of other things to worry about as well besides Bitcoin. And I think there could also be a change at the protocol level. But I don't want to speak on that without being fully informed.
Yeah, I'm not fully informed, but I would think that having a multi-sig level of security gives you a lot more protection from something like that than having your money even in a bank.
So for quantum specifically, or are you just saying like
For
financial
like a cyber
sensor?
attack or
Oh,
for like a cyber attack or some or
Okay.
a quantum computing related mishap. Because if you have a big cyber attack, it seems as though the security, the security of your finances are a lot less safe just in a traditional bank, or on like a TradFi trading platform than they would be if you had, multi-sig or cold storage.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of these like traditional finance, retail banking interfaces, and I don't think they're the most secure to begin with. So, I think Bitcoin is far more secure than keeping your wealth with any bank. Just a matter of being comfortable and knowing that there's going to be volatility in the short term.
I agree with you. So, were you paying attention to anything that was going on in Davos this past couple weeks?
Yeah, I mean, to a degree. Yeah, I'm gonna keep.
You write a lot about Davos. I feel like
Yeah, so I pay attention to it, but I also don't spend my entire day reading their press releases and their watching their videos. But I pay enough attention to think I understand kind of what's going on there. And we touched about it a little bit earlier, but maybe just for the audience, I'll just quickly summarize what I think kind of Davos is, and this is leaning on their own language as well.
Okay.
So Davos, so the World Economic Forum, I think was created in 1971 by Klaus Schwab, and I think it was originally for specifically European businessmen and corporations. And then it kind of expanded, I think maybe in the 80s to include not only corporations in Europe, but also not only like business executives in Europe, but also politicians, academics, economists. And it grew to become this World Economic Forum. It wasn't initially named that. So now the World Economic Forum has been kind of peddling stakeholder capitalism, ESG, which is environmental social governance, and these are just kind of new models for them to kind of co-opt the free market process, I would say.
What is stakeholder capitalism?
Yeah, so they call it just a private-public partnership. At a basic level, corporations, they're supposed to be driving more value to their shareholders, but the idea with stakeholder capitalism is they need to be accountable to a broader audience. So that would be not only their shareholders, but that could be, the government, that could be their local community, that could be people throughout the supply chain that work with them, right? So it's kind of incorporating this ambiguous group of stakeholders into corporate decision making.
Well, so isn't everybody a stakeholder?
Yeah, I mean, there's no definition to it. So yeah.
Well, because when they say stakeholders, like that's workers, that's community members, that's the place in which you're operating. How is that a bad thing?
So I would say it becomes a bad thing because so businesses stop making decisions based on signals from the market. So, supply and demand is supposed to be signaling what products and services the market wants, right? Like things become more expensive if there's less supply. And then people who produce that good or service should be stepping in and producing more of that to drive prices down. So that's kind of the pricing mechanism is how information passes through markets.
Okay.
And that becomes an issue because one, I would say we just said, there's an ambiguous group of stakeholders. Like who can define stakeholders and determine how are you being...
And which stakeholder gets preference?
Yeah, right.
Because it could just be that, hey, we're going to give preferential treatment to the government that's going to give us an insane tax break or an insane incentive or allow us to just build whatever we want wherever we want while also over-regulating our competitors.
Yeah. So that's a great point. So it becomes a problem for many reasons. But, yeah, Davos or the World Economic Forum, that's kind of one of their big ideas is stakeholder capitalism. So these public-private partnerships and just the government and corporations, kind of working side by side to achieve or find solutions to the world's most pressing issues. So that's something they were talking about last week is Davos is a ski village in Switzerland. It looks beautiful. I probably will never make it there myself, but it looks quite nice. And every year the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum happens there. I think there's maybe 2,000, 3,000 people. Political leaders, business executives, academia.
Yeah, they
media.
fly private jets there and talk to you about how we're the
Yeah.
we need to reduce our carbon footprint.
Right. So that's exactly right. So they essentially gather there and they talk about what are the most pressing issues of the world. And since they're also intellectual and skilled, right? They're able to kind of make decisions for the world because they have everyone they need to. In my opinion, it's kind of like a technocracy. I think maybe you mentioned on Twitter as well. A plutocracy. Is that maybe you weren't? Maybe
I didn't say the word plutocracy, but I know what a plutocracy is.
Yeah. So maybe you didn't. It could have been someone else. But anyways, yeah. I mean, I think they're kind of technocrats. So they believe that they have, like the medical experts, the science experts, let's say the climate experts, right?
And everybody's paid off to kind of say the same narrative that's going to give the Davos class even more control over how they want the world to go. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what they do. They just meet there every year. They talk about the pressing issues, and this kind of all ties back into the Great Reset, which is, if anyone has been on Twitter at all, they
know what that is. It's really hard to go on these rants and talk about these things without sounding like you have a tinfoil hat on. So that's why I'm like asking questions like, all right, well, what is this? How do you break this down in a way that, like, if I'm 5 years old, how are you going to explain to a 5-year-old about this? Or like, if I wear a mask alone in my car, you got to explain this. Explain to somebody who wears a mask alone in their car. Is like how I'm trying to say it.
Yeah, well, that's really tough because if you're wearing a mask alone in your car, I think you're beyond saving.
Well, that's the point. Like that's how I try to explain my views of things. Is to like, all right,
okay,
let's say the person I'm talking to wears a mask alone in their car. 3 years later.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. Yeah, so. What I would say, I guess, how I could explain this as simply as possible is this Davos class. Like, when we talk about the Davos class, we're talking about, let's say, the 10,000 or less most, we're talking
about the 0.0001%.
Yeah, it's a super class of people around the world. They're comprised of politicians, business executives, just general bureaucrats, academia, just billionaires kind of behind the scenes as well.
And also
bankers.
National leaders and local leaders, depending on which city is going to be the blueprint for what the Davos class wants to do first.
Right. So, trying to be very introductory with all this, and explain to the person in their car with a mask on by themselves. I would just say that a lot of the people involved are not bad actors, but it ultimately comes down to how can the Davos class just accumulate more money and power. And in my opinion, it's through crisis. So, when there's scarcity, people are scared. Resources are not plentiful, and typically a crisis is met with more government intervention and saying like, oh, that we actually have the solution to the problem that you have. And it's just a way over and over, as we saw with 2020, where the solution was just government getting more power, being able to say like, oh, your business is closed. Actually, it's not essential.
Hey, if you speak out against these lockdowns, you are a public health threat. You are killing grandma.
Yeah.
You should not have a platform to spew your misinformation because your misinformation is deadly. It is killing people. You are harming people. If you have a family member that believes these things, they are a member of QAnon, and you should not associate. You should call out your QAnon family member at Thanksgiving. By the way, then the BLM protests come in, and then if you criticize the BLM protests that are happening during COVID, now you're also a racist. Like that was kind of what.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, it is just kind of like an attack on free speech, and it will become an attack on, I would say, financial speech as well. So just the ability to transact. But yeah, so Davos, like, if we still want to touch on that subject, I would just say. These people essentially they come up with these pressing issues that the world faces, And in order to solve these issues, it's essentially, give up your freedoms and give up your private property. Like for climate, for instance, like you said, they all fly private to Davos to talk about how
their new favorite word, Jack, is polycrisis.
Yeah, that's a new one. I'm glad you brought that up.
Triple demic. Now we are in a polycrisis. I listen to a lot of these meetings because I have like an hour-long drive to come here. I've heard the word polycrisis a lot.
Yeah,
I hear a lot of very nice sounding buzzwords, and if you are a low information, like a little bit more of a low information person, like low information voter, so to speak, or if you're really busy with like whatever is going on with your day-to-day life, you have a wife, kids, husband, kids, you're a single parent, you don't have time to look into it. We have the luxury of looking into things. You might say, well, this sounds great. I'm struggling. I can't afford groceries. My gas bill's gone up 5x. I'm really my rent has tripled. I need a universal wage. They're right. I'm glad they're speaking out for me.
Yeah.
So these people are really good at using progressive and inclusive language to appeal to the masses, and the masses don't realize what the hidden fees are.
Yeah, the hidden fees are essentially
tyranny. Hidden fees are you're living in a techno-fascist dictatorship. Those are the hidden fees.
Yeah, the terms and conditions that you don't
eat the
get to
bugs
read.
and live in the pod.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly right. I mean, they're attacking the gas stoves, right? Like they say that these issues are so pressing. Maybe if you saw the polycrisis language they were throwing around, you may have also seen. I think it was the Global Risk Survey. They said they surveyed 1,200 experts in the Davos community and about the biggest crisis in the next 2 years and the biggest crisis in the next 10 years. And I think in the next 2 years, it was a cost of living crisis, which we could talk about how they essentially created that cost of living crisis. And then the crisis in 10 years is a failure to mitigate climate change. But if they actually believed what they said, they would be doing these conferences over Zoom, right? They wouldn't be flying private everywhere. They wouldn't have like 10 beautiful homes like all around the world or the country. And if you can afford to do that, by all means, you're free to do that. But don't tell other people they can't have a gas stove in their house.
Well, it's going to be very difficult for people to want to listen to you if that's who you are. And that's, I think, a big reason why there's such a push to shut down and regulate the internet. Because with a free and open internet, people see that. But with an internet that is in which we are controlling and fighting misinformation, well, 5-10 years from now, with a censored internet, who's going to know how many houses Klaus Schwab has? Who's going to know that Bill Gates is the world's largest owner of farmland?
Yeah.
Who's going to know that Ukraine was a money laundering scheme for FTX? Who's going to know? A lot less people. And the less people know about this, the more people are going to comply with whatever measure they put in place to get rid of their man-made crisis.
Right. Yeah, and I think as these crises evolve as well, I think there will be more and more people who unfortunately don't have the financial means to pay attention, right, or push back at all. They essentially have to embrace the universal basic income system and the central bank digital currency that would be, that would have those hidden fees that you mentioned. So that's kind of the issue we face right now, where there's energy crisis, there's a food crisis, and there's a cost of living crisis. And I would have to argue, I mean, maybe not entirely, but a lot of this seems to be driven by decision making at the Davos class. Because, the energy crisis is a lot to do with ESG and not investing in reliable energy and instead investing in green energy, which became very popular for just making money in this Davos class and in a way to kind of fit their climate narrative as well.
How does investing in green energy make money? Because there's a lot of money in big oil. Like there's still like $1 trillion worth of oil and gas to get dug in from the Earth's core.
Yeah, so I think it ultimately ties in with the climate narrative, which seems to be a very effective way to create change in the most important systems that I think we have is a global
cheapening the production costs. Like when someone like Bill Gates owns I'm just spitballing here. Sorry for interrupting, but
that's all right.
If somebody like Bill Gates, hypothetically, you're the largest farmland owner in the United States, if not the world, right? And it does. There are a lot of costs to raising chickens and raising livestock. Like that costs money, and it's probably a lot cheaper to industrially produce fake eggs and fake meat than it is to actually have real cows and real animals on your farm. And then if you're just producing fake meat and you still sell your product at whatever that at what the previous cost of real beef and real eggs were, your profit margins probably can go through the roof. So I could see that being one aspect of it, but there is as it stands though, when people say, oh, it's about money, when people say that, when people talk about that, that's more about in the future. Like the money's more the money that we're talking about that people can make off of green energy. That's a future investment. Like that's potential. Because right now there is more money in oil than there is in renewables. But in the future, if you limit this, if you start limiting the amount that people can drill, and you start limiting the amount of fertilizer people can use. I'm sorry if I'm answering the question I'm asking, but I'm just spitballing here, right? And if you start limiting that, and the largest farmland owners are able to pretty much produce industrial waste and feed it to the public at a really cheap cost, not only do these farmland owners make an insane amount of money, but oil executives actually make a ton of money because of the supply constraints. So it costs a lot more money to buy oil and buy a lot of these things than it otherwise would have. And if you do own a farm and you have cows and chickens and you do sell beef and these other animals, because someone like Bill Gates isn't going to stop growing chickens and beef or anything like that. They're going to just monopolize this. They get to sell their beef for 10 times the cost of what it normally is going to be right now.
I don't know though. I think
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know it does make sense. The one thing I would add there is maybe you may have seen it a couple days ago where it was announced that Bill Gates and I think the language was a slew of billionaires, and this was in Bloomberg Climate a couple days ago. They invested in this, I think, Australian company that creates lab-grown seaweed as a new way to feed cows because it reduces their methane emission. Apparently, so this is one example of how I believe they spin up a narrative and then they're able to invest into companies that meet that narrative to then make a ton of money on the other side as an investment. Because I just find it absolutely perplexing that first of all, if people even buy into the idea that cows burping is destroying the planet like that. If people, there are a lot of people out there that I think genuinely believe animals are destroying the planet, and that's why we should be switching over to plant-based, and we shouldn't be giving money to farmers who raise cows and other ruminant animals. But that's an example of Bill Gates and other people just kind of creating a narrative about climate, which has been in the works for decades now, but then investing in companies that create a fake solution to their fake problem. Yes.
So I was going to actually ask this next question. How do you feel about ESG? Because we kind of were talking about it a little bit.
Yeah.
What we were really talking about was basically kind of the ESG narrative in a nutshell.
Yeah.
But what are your concerns with ESG? Because on the surface, environmental social governance, it sounds like, we're finally going to hold companies accountable to become responsible stewards of the environment and not be discriminatory of people and pay people a fair and livable wage. These are the Davos talking points.
Yeah.
And they all sound great. On paper, these talking points sound great. And so just, speaking to me like I wear a mask alone in my car, Jack, what are the concerns? What are the hidden fees?
So the hidden fees would be capital is not allocated to where it needs to go. Again, the pricing mechanism of markets is supposed to signal when there are imbalances between supply and demand, and then producers of those goods and services should be able to step in and kind of balance that out. So things, if there's an energy crisis because we don't have enough oil and gas, then the government shouldn't be able to say, you can't actually drill anymore. You can't drill any more oil because we don't want you to. So then it creates artificial scarcity in things. So to answer the question about ESG, what I think the issue is rather than letting the market determine where capital needs to go and where investments need to be made to drive to compete and drive costs down, what ends up happening is ESG is essentially just a way to screen the capital allocation process through these, like you said, they sound great on paper, but essentially these, I would almost say like political games created by Davos, especially Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock. He's kind of the, I would say the godfather of ESG when it comes to Wall Street. And essentially it allows them to play favorites and determine, this, we're going to invest in this because it fits our narrative, and we're not going to invest in that because it doesn't fit our narrative. And I just think that it is so far removed from what capitalism is and should be that it's not even a capitalist system if we're just allocating capital based on, political games, essentially.
Well, the other problem, too, with the ESG stuff is the cooperation and collaboration between, like, the public-private partnerships. Right? And so when Larry Fink says, hey, we're going to invest X amount of dollars into this company because they align with our values and the values of my friends at Davos, well, the government in which that company is based in turn, if these collaborations are going to play themselves out, will in turn offer that company a subsidy or more money or overregulate their competitors. So then it almost makes it so that you're cornering the market and you get to make insane amounts of profits while nobody else gets anything. And it actually widens the wealth gap and makes wealth concentration amongst the global elites. It's already really bad. It makes it insurmountably bad.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's all kind of ties back to fiat money, in my opinion, because there are central banks that are able to create money for nothing. They're able to determine how to allocate money, and that's really the fundamental issue. And that's why I think Bitcoin's such an important phenomenon in the world today, because it removes, if done properly and adoption gets there, then there could be a separation of state and money, and no longer would the state be determining who wins and loses. Instead, it would be based on proof of work, right? Like actually delivering real.
That's a long ways away, and the state's probably still going to determine it, but they won't have as much power to determine it.
Yeah. So I agree with you. That is a long ways away if it does materialize.
There will be more accountability for how the state does things.
Yeah.
How do you feel about central bank digital currencies?
Yeah, that's like the ultimate hidden fee, I would say. That is...
What is a central bank digital currency for my audience who may wear a mask in their car alone?
Yeah, so for those of you out there with the mask on, essentially, as it works in the United States at least, right now there's a central bank, and then there's commercial banks like J.P. Morgan, Wells Fargo, and then there's those commercial banks interact with us, the peasants. The central bank digital currency would almost disintermediate the commercial banking system. So people, rather than banking with Wells Fargo, they would bank directly with the Federal Reserve, and everyone would kind of have like their FedCoin account. And what this allows, why central banks want this, and the proponents, what kind of their talking points are, it allows for more precise monetary policy. So, first of all, it would work very well with UBI, because if everyone's account was being held directly with the Federal Reserve, then they have a ledger of all of that, right? And they could determine, who needs what amount of UBI based on whatever parameters they decide. They also say it's a more secure way to transact in the financial system. They say it's, I think they talk about lower fees, faster payments. So essentially, they just want to take kind of this idea of blockchain technology and then implement it into this centralized cryptocurrency, right? So their point of view is we can use central bank digital currencies to be more precise in how we kind of manage the economy. So it would ultimately lead to central banks being more involved in central banks and the government, of course, because they're tied at the hip, being more involved in everyone's lives. And what I ultimately think is terrible about this is going back to financial censorship. That would be a very easy way to, if everyone was just banking directly with central banks, that would be a great way to just shut people's accounts down who are dissidents of the state, or maybe even not that severe. Perhaps they say that Alex has too much money in his bank account and we want him to spend it into the economy, and be a good consumer. So we're going to apply a negative interest rate to his account until he spends a certain amount of money. Or perhaps we're going to give out money and it can only be spent at certain places. It's essentially a way to program
the money for what they want to spend it on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they could also say, oh, well, the 1% need to actually pay their fair share, and now you have to pay your fair share, or you have to spend it on certain things. Yeah, I can see that happening.
Yeah.
What will happen to private banks if that happens?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of the big question, and I think I don't know if I have the best answer to that, and I think that's also why we're kind of seeing
pushback?
A little bit of pushback in the U.S. I wouldn't say that CBDCs are inevitable.
Well, pretty much every country has a pilot program right now.
They do have a pilot program. So I guess maybe they're trying to answer that question for you, right? Because like if you're Jamie Dimon and you're the CEO of J.P. Morgan, you don't want your business of retail banking to be disintermediated by the central bank digital currency. So perhaps the pilot program is, first of all, determining how a central bank digital currency works at a technical level, and then also determining how do the commercial banks stay relevant in the next iteration of the fiat financial system.
Yeah, that's going to be really interesting to figure out.
Yeah,
because they're all like the heads of commercial banks are also going to Davos too.
Yeah.
Right, like they're also going to the same country clubs, as Jerome Powell. Like they're all socializing together, right? And I'm loosely saying this, right? But it's a pretty like fair assumption to assume that, right? So it's something to think about, right? Like if I'm a private banker, or if I am the CEO of a private bank, what happens if the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve has full access to the financial system? Where do I fit in? How do I lose my how do I lose my power? Could this also be why they're tightening rates at such a crazy pace? And this could be done as a way. Maybe Jay Powell is doing this as a way to destroy the private banks.
Yeah. So it's interesting you brought that up. Do you know Tom Luongo?
No.
Okay. So he's I'd say he's like a market analyst. He's pretty active on Twitter. Very sharp guy. Has really interesting perspective, so everyone should check him out.
Okay.
But essentially, one of his theories kind of right now is the Federal Reserve, so led by Jerome Powell, is kind of going against the Davos class right now, where I think it was maybe in 2021 sometime, where essentially central bank leaders met and kind of all the other central banks were kind of on board with the Davos mission of just printing a ton of money to kind of fund these social issues such as climate change and racial justice, all these weird mandates that shouldn't be affiliated with a central bank, right? Even if they're a good idea,
even if it's a good idea, like it should not be, it should not be through the corporate the corporate financial system.
Yeah. So Jerome Powell was the only central bank chairman in the world who seemed to kind of not be on board with this idea.
But he was loosening rates all through 2021.
Yeah, he was. But then in 2022, I mean, the Fed has really been the only central bank to actually increase rates at any material rate. Other central banks have done so. Other key central banks have done so, but at kind of a much slower pace. And essentially what ends up happening is the U.S. dollar becomes very strong as there's this interest rate parity, and other countries that have U.S. dollar denominated debts, their currency is weakening against the dollar, so it actually becomes harder to pay back their dollar denominated debts, and a lot of countries kind of go bankrupt. So the theory that I don't want to butcher Tom's theory at all, but it's essentially that he is putting out there the idea that is Jerome Powell going against the Davos class at the moment in terms of their policy. I'm not fully on board with it. I kind of think that my 2 cents on the Fed right now is they need to save whatever credibility they still have, because like you said, they in 2021 they were still at 0% interest rates. They were still printing money. They were telling everyone inflation was transitory. Don't worry about your gas bills or your food bills. It's all going to be, it's all going to be fine.
Yeah.
And then they had to eventually turn a corner on that, because they need to remain somewhat credible. And I think ultimately one of the issues I've been writing about a lot on my Substack is the fiscal situation of the U.S. government. The government is insolvent. The only way the kind of system continues to go is if they continue to issue more and more debt at lower and lower rates. So I think right now we're just kind of watching theater of the Federal Reserve try to keep their credibility and system alive.
No, I see that. I also see that when you're tightening and other countries cannot keep up with that, you are forcing other countries to default on their debts or print themselves into oblivion. And when either of these things happen, you get tremendous social unrest and a full collapse of the economy, right? Either by devaluing everybody's currency and installing new leadership, or just by a debt default and everybody gets really poor. And then all of a sudden there's no rule of law and there's total anarchy.
Yeah.
Because then it just becomes whoever has the biggest club wins when there's no system in place. And that's what you see happening on either end of the scale. And then when that does happen, eventually you get leadership changes. And when you get those leadership changes and those leaders happen to be, WEF young global leaders like in Sri Lanka, they had a perfect score, a perfect ESG score with the World Economic Forum. We saw what happened. Their government got overthrown. And then the person that replaced the previous leader became even worse than the leader. And he became even more authoritarian. And I think now Sri Lanka is using central bank digital currencies.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, I believe that they are. I could be wrong, but I think that they are starting to use that. And so once these countries start defaulting or printing themselves into oblivion, well, now there's no choice but to use a central bank digital currency.
Yeah, that's a great point. I agree with what you said. So I think it's kind of a time will tell situation, right? Either the Federal Reserve will continue to tighten or keep interest rates higher, and we'll start to see other countries have to print their currencies into oblivion and perhaps go down the path you just mentioned, or the Federal Reserve and the U.S. government, they may just get a tap on the shoulder and say, we need to start loosening right now because we're insolvent as a government, as every government is.
And then what happens when they start loosening?
Yeah. So, all right. So my 2 cents on that is there probably will have to be another crisis that occurs at the same time when the central banks begin to lower interest rates. Because here's the thing, they're trying to get inflation down, right?
Yeah.
So if they're unsuccessful in getting inflation down and they have to start lowering interest rates and start printing money again, and they were not able to achieve their objective, then that'll look like a complete failure, and more people will begin to question the credibility of the Federal Reserve. And ultimately, because these currencies are backed by nothing, all they're backed by, well, besides like the military, so that is something. But these currencies, they do rely.
Well, they're backed by the military, but then today the kids in our age group and younger can't do a push-up, and you have boys thinking that they're girls, and you have a bunch of they/thems going through the public school system, and hey, listen, I love everybody. Don't be a bigot, but this is also how you lose a major war.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now our dollar is not backed by the force of the U.S. military because our U.S. military becomes a joke because it's full of they/thems.
Yeah. Well, all right. So to that point, though, so these currencies still, all they rely on, right, is people trusting them, right? Like the only reason why the dollars still work.
Source, trust me, bro.
Yeah. Yeah. So I forget where we're going. Oh, so if they start printing again and they haven't achieved their inflation, reduction objective, then I think there will just have to be another crisis that will miraculously appear to justify the cutting of rates and the printing of money.
Yeah, and then I could see a lengthening and tightening cycle that'll just occur for 10 years. They'll just get banks. That'll just get private banks and lenders to just go insolvent so that people just become more and more dependent on the CBDC. And I think I could see that happening too. I could see them saying, okay, we're at 3%. Let's lower the rates, and then all of a sudden the private banks are going to just lend money out irresponsibly because that's just what they do, and nobody's going to change anything. And then they're going to have to tighten again, and then people are not going to pay their debts back. And then if people can't pay what they owe to the bank, eventually the bank has no money, and then the bank has to default. And then people are, it costs $100 to buy an apple. All these factors in play. Can't buy a home. Your student debt is mushrooming. You're going to create a lot of dissatisfaction and anger amongst a broader and broader segment of the U.S. population. Well, eventually some kind of a reset starts unfolding. So I could see this being a long game.
Yeah, I mean, you could absolutely be right about that. So I think ultimately, we can just theorize about what could happen. And I think it's good that we're paying attention and we're informed, and we at least have an idea of what's going on in the world. I think ultimately, we'll be better off because we just at least have that baseline knowledge. But I think then we start having to think about, what actions could we take to create a more resilient life. And that's ultimately where I think Bitcoin comes into play, and, storing your wealth outside of a system that could be weaponized against you. That's where I think
and having a community of people where you can learn how to grow food. I'm still not there yet, or go fishing, or learn how to shoot a gun, learn how to learn a martial art, do something where you're able to take care of yourself. God, if God forbid this happens, like get a family, do go back to basics. And I think Bitcoin, in its root, is basics. It is going back to basics.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we'll need to do, because I agree with you. Times will get tougher before they get any better.
For some.
And
for some, if you're a lot of people really got hurt during COVID, but the people that stacked and hodled in 2020, their lives got a lot better.
Yeah. So I would say across the board, though, things will get worse before they get better.
On a macro level.
Yeah. In a big picture.
Yeah, I agree.
So I agree with you. I mean, those are kind of skills like what you just mentioned. That's also what I'm trying to work on, become a more self-sufficient person. I'm a big proponent of going out and getting your food locally. I want to start growing my own food. It's been a little bit tough to do that because I've been traveling quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I'm in Austin for a couple months now. So
okay. You moved here for good?
We'll figure it out.
All right.
Yeah. But yeah, I just got into town last week, and I'm
nice.
going to be here until May. So
I'm excited about that. That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. So it is. And, I think ultimately what we just need to do is focus on localism, right? The Great Reset and whatever agenda may be out there is only as effective as you let it be, and as much as you rely on their systems. So if you don't...
That's why I also do what I do, because I think the most important thing that you could do is mock these people relentlessly.
Yeah.
And the level of wokeness that gets perpetuated in between all this stuff, because the Davos class, the one thing that we have going for us is that they are so clueless and out of touch, and especially the academics that they rely on to corroborate their ideals. They're the most sheltered people in the world, like we mentioned.
Yeah.
And when the wealthiest of the wealthy and the most sheltered people on the planet are combining forces to dictate global policies for the future, the end result is unavoidably going to be an absolute mockery.
Yeah.
And so it becomes really easy to mock these people into oblivion. And that's also why I do the culture jamming, because I think that no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, the people in the Davos class that are trying to make these rules are not serious people who should be taken seriously.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it seems that narratives are starting to crumble in a sense. I think we still have a long ways to go, and we're probably not at peak clown world yet, as hard as that may be.
We're definitely not.
Yeah.
We're definitely not. We're getting up there, but we're not quite. There's like a 702 retracement where we're at. You know what I mean? We're like.
What do you think
is
peak
resistant?
What do you think peak clown world would be?
That's a good question. What do I think peak clown world would be? I'll let you answer that, Jack. What do you think peak clown world would be?
I don't know.
Oh, you know
I was hoping you would know.
No. You know what my theory is on what I think peak clown world would be? I think peak clown world would be certain countries adopting central bank digital currencies. You would see the Great Reset manifesting in a select group of countries. you would see every Davos talking point mentioned within the Great Reset agenda being manifested in a select group of countries and cities, so that you could see firsthand what the result is. That's what I think. That's when we're going to get to peak clown world.
So then you think at that point, perhaps there could be a reversal in the sanity.
Right, because someone in Texas is going to say, oh, my God, look at what they're doing in New York. We better never let this happen here.
Yeah.
You know,
isn't that kind of already happening, though, at least in the U.S.?
Sort of. You think it is, but we could talk about, like, conservative politics and how, like, a lot of Texas Republicans, like, are literally in bed with Democrats to do the World Economic Forum agenda, but they have to be quieter about it, and they do it in a different manner. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like they won't create legislation to protect your God-given rights. They just won't enforce the tyranny and like just say and do divisive things to like to turn themselves off to people our age, so that like 2, 4, 8 years from now, eventually a Beto O'Rourke type person just becomes the governor of Texas. Like
right.
That's what I see kind of happening. And then you have like problems with the voting systems in like big cities with the county clerks in like big Texas cities. You see a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of the conservative leaders are really out of touch too. They're really bad as well. But that's not why we're doing this episode. Like that's for a different guest to talk about. But that is something to think about. But I think like peak clown world occurs when countries start actually defaulting on their debts. That's what I think. I think that's my hypothesis. Or peak clown world occurs if an actual major cyber attack occurs.
Yeah, and Davos likes to talk about cyber attacks.
Peak clown world is going to be when the next crisis happens.
Yeah,
that's when you're going to get peak clown world. You're actually going to get a bit of an intermission in the clown show, I think, this year. In a way, like you're going to see these people talk about what they're talking about on CNN and NBC, but people are tuned out. They're not going to pay attention. They're not going to listen. They're tired of it. They don't want to talk politics at all.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the best way to talk politics right now is to have fun, make funny videos. And when you're talking to people about politics, it's like discussions like me and you have, where we try to figure out what do you think is going to happen so that we better prepare for the future situation.
Yeah.
So peak clown world is probably going to be the next crisis, like the next major crisis that the entire public gets really scared about. And the only thing I can think about that occurring is if we get a cyber attack. That's the only thing I think the public is actually going to freak out about, is if everything gets fully shut off and then like, hey, they blame Russia. Hey, we're going to blame the people that didn't get vaccinated. We're going to blame, we're going to blame the Bitcoiners. We're going to, it's going to be stuff like that.
Yeah. So I think I would agree with you that cyber attack is probably a more palpable crisis in the near term than climate, because I think the climate narrative, it obviously has resonated with like billions of people around the world, and there's a lot of people on board with the climate crisis, but there are enough people who kind of see through it and just see the blatant hypocrisy of these people who are pushing
and these
the
people
narrative.
these people like with COVID, people stayed home and they put their masks on. They did that, right? Nobody here, despite how worried people are about climate change, nobody here is giving up their cars.
That's right.
You know what I mean? Nobody here is turning their AC off. No, you go into an office, you go to City Hall, and it's like 55 degrees inside City Hall in February. and these are the guys lecturing you about climate change. You have electric scooters littering the entire streets in downtown Austin. People throw these in the water. They do God knows what. Even with masks. You know how many masks got like thrown into our landfills and our water supply? It's in the tens of billions of dollars worth of masks that are irreparably poisoning our water and our landfills. And that's an environmental emergency, but no one in Davos is talking about it. So people see through enough that, like, people, the crisis can never materialize on a broad scale unless people are willing to make their own sacrifices.
Yeah.
And a cyber attack is the only thing that does that, because if people get wiped out, if people get all their finances wiped out from a cyber attack, they're going to have to get compensated. How are they getting compensated?
Printing money.
No. How else? Because why would you trust putting anything into a bank or buying any stock or doing anything if everything just gets wiped out in a cyber attack?
I wouldn't trust it.
Okay, so what's going to happen? What do you think is going to happen if a massive cyber attack occurs? What do you think they're going to start rolling out and actually and get the public to actually consent to.
Yeah, that would be central bank digital currencies, most likely.
And the only people who are not going to fall victim to that are people who either A, have large amounts of gold, or B, people who have large amounts of Bitcoin on a multi-sig. And as it stands right now, you're probably safer in that event. With the gold seems like the safer bet. But the Bitcoin, if your Bitcoin is still safe after that type of a cyber attack, you're gonna gain a lot more, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So
like your net worth, like your reward, will skyrocket having Bitcoin on like a multi-sig with the cyber attack. But with gold, you're guaranteed to not lose any of your worth.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I think.
So I would just say that that the Bitcoin network would withstand a cyber attack, and that wouldn't be an issue. I don't know, how that would be possible unless like there's some way to EMP the entire world and I don't know, destroy the internet. Like, I'm not really sure what could be done to cause a permanent harm to the Bitcoin network. It would only be temporary, like you said, and as long as you're holding your own keys and they're in, you're either doing multi-sig or you have a single signature, so you have a cold storage, you're going to be good. And I agree with you. It's probably good to have some precious metals as well. But I also don't think we're going to go into like a Mad Max sort of future. So,
I don't think so either. I think that you might see glimpses of that for like 3 weeks, and then the government's going to say, "Look, we have central bank digital currencies. We're going to make all of you whole. Here, here's your Fed coins.
Yeah,
here are your Fed coins, and this is what we're going to do. And now people are going to sign up for enslavement without even."
Yeah, so that's certainly possible, and I think I would have to agree that that's a more likely scenario than the climate because. Like you said, I mean, you don't see people kind of ready to sacrifice, their air conditioners or their cars, unless it gets to the point where people have all these digitally connected devices in their homes and their cars, right? That could be turned off remotely, which I think that is the case, but it's certainly not widespread adoption.
Yeah, but I think that's where you could start getting peak clown world is with with a cyber attack or something like that occurring. I could see, and Bitcoin adoption has increased tremendously.
Yeah.
But like, unless you get like that, and that's why it's also really important to get as many people to have self-custody of their finances on something like Bitcoin, because if a cyber attack does occur and nobody has, and everything's in traditional finance or they have like their high yield shit coins, no one's going to trust crypto anymore. No one's going to trust anything. The only thing people are going to trust is the government money now.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that because I think to a degree FTX kind of achieved that mission. Obviously, it's not going to kill Bitcoin, and Bitcoin Bitcoin adoption is still going to grow exponentially. But regardless of how contrived the whole FTX collapse was, it was at least a useful thing to point at and destroy credibility of the crypto ecosystem to the general public who doesn't know the difference between Dogecoin and Bitcoin, which is probably still 90% of people.
Oh, a lot of people don't know, yeah.
So that was a really effective way to, point at the collapse of FTX, and not only FTX, but all the other exchanges in 2022, and just say, this industry is full of scams and Ponzi schemes, and just like, it's all about speculation, and there's no consumer protection, and I think that's, and actually, I believe in the United States, the central bank digital currency pilot was announced shortly after the whole FTX
thing,
contagion and blow up. Yeah. So that's interesting to think about.
It is. I don't think it's going to have a long-term effect on that, though. I think next bull market, everyone's buying the shit coins again.
Yeah, I guess people just like don't
People
learn,
have short attention spans.
Yeah.
They have high time preferences. There'll be some new exchange. Like, I think Coinbase is actually going to survive. And I think that, like, what I think, like, the best altcoins are?
No, tell me.
Stocks of companies that mine Bitcoin, or stocks of companies that just allow you to have coins on exchanges. Like, instead of buying like Polygon or like putting a bunch of money into like a cryptocurrency that has a CEO who can mint as many tokens as he wants, which is like the opposite of decentralization. By the way, they got a board of directors.
Right.
Like that's asecurity.
Yeah, exactly.
And your coin is only being issued to fund a network, and all that it's doing is artificially pumping the bags of the network that you're creating, and eventually these creators will just sell their tokens because they have a bunch of their tokens that they made. They'll just sell their tokens once it gets to an insane price, and then they just raise cash in a really, really easy and kind of deceptive type of manner,
Right.
while fleecing a bunch of retail investors, which is like super dishonest.
Oh yeah.
I mean, but like if you're smart, you just know what you're getting into, and you're in a casino. But like, what was I saying?
You were talking about altcoins, so Bitcoin, mining companies and I guess crypto exchange equity, right? Like owning equity in those companies.
Right. So like these high yield like shit coins, so to speak, could give you a much like higher fiat gains within a very, very short term time frame. But like a Riot blockchain went up to like $80 a share when Bitcoin was like 70,000.
Yeah.
Right. What do you think the price of Riot blockchain is going to be if Bitcoin breaks 100K?
Yeah, it's going to be a high number. It's going to be triple digits, and I get where you're going.
And so if Riot's like $5 a share right now, and you buy 100, you buy 100 shares of Riot blockchain, like you made, like 20. You can make like 20x on your investment. Whereas if you buy Bitcoin, you're probably if you're gonna like look in reality about how Bitcoin moves and look in terms of each halving cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you're probably gonna 5 to 10x your investment. Is the range, maybe like probably 5 to 10x is what your investment will be in the next halving cycle, is what I think it'll probably turn out. But Riot blockchain, you can make like 20x potentially, and so like that is another altcoin. But people just don't call it that. It's just buy stocks and or MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy went to $1,200 a share. It's like $250 now. If you bought MicroStrategy when it was like $150, or if you bought it now, MicroStrategy could be $2,000 a share. Like, so that there is like.
Yeah, so I would say it ultimately depends on, your goal, right? If you're trying to make more fiat
gains,
money, then maybe it's a smart strategy to try to buy some of these, Bitcoin related companies like equities of Riot or MicroStrategy. Obviously not financial advice.
Yeah,
I don't know if I would do it myself because I'm not really in it for the fiat gains. Like I do want my purchasing power to, be preserved and grow over time by purchasing Bitcoin. And I don't want to, just watch my money either be just melt away like an ice cube or, be confiscated from me by holding it in US dollar. But I'm quite okay with my purchasing power in dollar terms, 5x, 10x in the next halving cycle, because I'm not going to sell it anyway. It's just an accumulation game for me. And, I think in the future we won't really have to sell the Bitcoin. We'll just be able to buy goods and services that we want in that Bitcoin.
No,
but I get what you're saying. Like, if people want to speculate on equities of Bitcoin companies or make good investments too.
It seems like a safer way to buy altcoins is to just buy stock in companies that own Bitcoin directly.
Yeah.
That's what I think. That's all I think.
I see what you're saying.
It's a safer way to buy. I think it's a safer way.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I agree with you. I mean, I don't condone buying any shit coins, but I do. I don't think it's a bad idea to purchase equity in companies that are related to Bitcoin.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying.
It could be a good idea.
One thing before we wrap up, because we've been talking for a minute, right? There is also a very distinct possibility that none of these doomsday conspiracies even come to fruition.
Right.
Right, because inflation was super high in the 1970s, right? And things were crazy back then. You had like gas shortages. You had a lot of really bad stuff that happened in the 70s. And things kind of turned out okay. I mean, I'm not going to say they turned out okay, but you didn't get full-blown tyranny in America as a result of everything that happened. So there is a small possibility that we might make it through these crises. Or the World Economic Forum might just say, hey, we're making it through this crisis, and we collaborated really well with these entities to make it through because they just see how bad their pushback is, and they could just say, well, we can't achieve this new world order that we want to achieve right now, but maybe we'll do it in like 10 years. Like they literally said that at Davos. So like there is that possibility that things just work out, and they try something like this again in 10 years.
Yeah. So I agree. I mean, it's not a foregone conclusion, right, that all these crises will just happen and we'll be living as serfs in a feudalistic society 5 years from now, right? But what I do think is inevitable is fiat currencies continuing to lose purchasing power at an increasing rate. So the difference between now and the inflation of the 1970s is, that was only a couple of years after the fiat standard was introduced. And now we're 50 years down the road and things have continued to get worse. And the system is just unstable because we need to have a sound money system. And that's ultimately what draws me into Bitcoin is we could have a new money that is hard to produce, similar to gold, and we could use that as a new foundation for our economy, either at a local or global scale. And while I think it's possible that maybe like a cyber crisis or climate, whatever kind of stupid crisis is in the pipeline, right? Maybe those don't happen. What I do think happens is I think most people are still going to continue to struggle under higher cost of living without commensurate increases in their wages. And I think we'll continue to see distortions in the world because when you
cyber crisis will potentially be used to create a war on Bitcoiners, though, because what'll happen is people look at how many people got wiped out from FTX, right? Okay, if you have all your stuff in an exchange and a cyber crisis occurs, they're gonna say that the Bitcoiners told you to buy all the crypto.
Yeah, they'll say that, but we didn't, right?
No, I know, but that's what the narrative. That's the
narrative
is going to be.
Yeah, I agree.
So I can see that happening. Did you watch any of the crypto conferences at the WF?
No, I didn't watch any of them.
Oh,
Did you?
Yeah, I listened to the yes. I'll say this though, right? Not a single Bitcoiner was on the panel. They had cryptocurrency discussions at the World Economic Forum about the use case and the cost and the price and what it can be used for. And they talked about how blockchain and cryptocurrency can be used to it's all the Davos talk. We're going to solve world hunger and help with robotics, help with AI, help with all these, help reduce aging, help with all these great things to help make our future better. Not a single Bitcoiner was on the panel. You know who was on the panel? The CEO of Ripple.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bitcoin is, obviously.
It's an oddity. It's just odd that,
Well, they hate Bitcoin.
Yeah. It's really telling, and it really shows everything. They said a lot without saying anything by just having, by not having a single Bitcoiner talk on the panel. Yeah.
Maybe, probably most Bitcoiners wouldn't want to show up to Davos either because, everyone would have it out for them, and who knows what could happen there. But I agree with you. It's like, obviously separating state and money, which is what Satoshi Nakamoto kind of, wanted to do with the introduction of Bitcoin. That is not a agenda that Davos would want to get behind. So
yes,
it's of course, yeah. I mean, it's just not surprising that they wouldn't have any sort of Bitcoin representation there because they want everything to be proof of stake, so then they can just influence the protocols, just like Ethereum, which is there's a lot of talk. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of talk on the World Economic Forum website about how great Ethereum is and, proof of stake because it's like climate, it's not bad for the climate and all of that. And it's also great for them because they could just use it to influence the protocol because proof of stake is no different than the fiat system, really, where, the more tokens you have in that system, the more influence you have on the protocol.
Yeah, no, agreed. It's like it's treasury bonds for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, they can use the same like protocol that they use for how Ethereum is run, or how they could use that, and they could use the speed for which Ripple sends cross-border transactions, and they could talk with these people and really pick their brains and conduct think tanks about how they can make a good CBDC.
Right.
I could definitely see that happening.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to tune in to. You'll have to send me the link of one of the panels that you liked, or maybe not liked.
I didn't like it at all. Yeah. It was ridiculous. Like,
but that you listened to. I'm curious to check it out.
Yeah, but I don't think they're even going to force CBDCs on us. I think what it's going to be is going to be like a way to just give people a universe. It's going to be a way to like help the impoverished and help help people who are poor, help single moms. Like, it would be the solution to giving people a livable wage. And then if you
Right.
oppose CBDCs, you're, hey, you're a capitalist. You're, you don't care about income inequality. You hate poor people. It's gonna be the same. Like the progressives are gonna come out in force. They're gonna be the biggest defenders of the CBDCs, just like they were the biggest defenders of the vaccine mandates. Like, we hate big corporations, but we love Pfizer. It's gonna be the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just like the hypocrisy just never ends, and it always gets worse somehow.
Well, it gets worse if you don't make your life better. But anyway, Jack, how do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, just find me on Twitter, MacroJack21 on Twitter, and then I write on Substack. It's fiatcave.substack.com. So that's where you can find me.
All right, thank you so much, Macro Jack, guys. Thanks,
Alex.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Oh God, dude, I'm freezing.
It's chilly.